His war dog uncovered a buried secret beneath an old garage, and powerful men were ready to kill for it. Divorced, homeless, and carrying scars no one could see, former Navy SEAL Caleb Mercer drove deep into Montana's Bitterroot Mountains with only his retired K-9 partner, Ghost, beside him. The abandoned garage his father left behind looked forgotten by time, until Ghost began scratching beneath the concrete floor. What Caleb uncovered that night would expose decades of corruption, dead veterans, and a secret powerful men would do anything to keep buried. Comment 1 or 0 and tell us where you're watching from tonight. The rain had followed Caleb Mercer for nearly 3 states. It streaked across the windshield of the old Ford pickup in long silver lines, blurring the world into a watercolor of gray highways, truck stops, and fading mile markers. Somewhere behind him, thousands of miles away, Charleston had disappeared into memory. The city lights, the courtroom, the empty house that no longer belonged to him. Caleb tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the truck climbed another winding mountain road. The heater barely worked. Cold air slipped through cracks in the doors, carrying the scent of wet pine and distant snow. Beside him, Ghost lifted his massive head from the passenger seat. The German Shepherd's amber eyes reflected the glow of the dashboard lights. A long scar crossed the dog's muzzle, disappearing into dark fur near one ear. Years earlier, in Afghanistan, shrapnel had nearly killed him during an explosives sweep outside Kandahar. Caleb had dragged the wounded dog 200 yards under enemy fire. Neither of them had ever fully healed. "You still with me, old man?" Caleb asked quietly. Ghost blinked once and rested his head against Caleb's arm. That simple weight grounded him more than any medication ever had. The highway curved sharply along the Bitterroot Mountains, opening to a breathtaking valley swallowed in late October fog. Endless forests stretched beneath towering ridgelines dusted with early snow. Rivers cut silver through the dark pines. Isolated ranches sat miles apart like forgotten outposts from another century. Beautiful country. Lonely country. Exactly the kind of place a man disappeared to when he no longer belonged anywhere else. Caleb exhaled slowly, staring through the rain. 58 years old, retired Navy SEAL, divorced, nearly broke, homeless. The words sat in his chest like stones. 3 months earlier, he had still believed his life could be repaired. Even after the arguments with Diane became colder and more vicious. Even after years of sleeping in separate bedrooms. Even after she stopped looking at him like a husband and started looking at him like a burden she regretted carrying. But the courtroom had ended everything quickly. The judge barely looked at him. Diane's attorney had spoken in polished legal language while Caleb sat frozen beside his own lawyer, exhausted and emotionally hollow. The house went to Diane. The retirement investments, the accounts, most of the furniture, almost everything they had built over 32 years together vanished with the stroke of a pen. Caleb had walked out carrying only a duffel bag, a truck title, and Ghost's leash. That had been 6 days ago. Now all he owned in the world fit inside the rusted pickup rattling through western Montana. Thunder rolled low across the mountains. Ghost's ears twitched instantly. Caleb glanced at the dog and forced a faint smile. "You hear everything, don't you?" Ghost stared ahead through the windshield, always alert, always watching. That was the thing about military dogs. Retirement never truly existed for them. Part of their mind remained on patrol forever. Caleb understood that better than anyone. The road narrowed as darkness deepened around the truck. Fog drifted through the trees like smoke. The farther west they drove, the more isolated the world became. And isolation had a way of pulling old memories to the surface. Suddenly, Caleb wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Afghanistan. The explosion came first, a deafening roar. Heat slammed into his body. Sand and debris filled the air. Somebody screamed over the radio. Caleb remembered blood on his gloves, the smell of burning fuel, Ghost barking wildly somewhere in the smoke. Then Lucas Hale's face. Young, terrified, dying. Caleb blinked hard and jerked the truck slightly as headlights flashed across the center line. A horn blared. He corrected the wheel immediately. Ghost sat upright now, staring at him. "I'm fine," Caleb muttered, but his breathing had changed. His pulse hammered against his throat. The memory wouldn't let go. Lucas Hale had been 26 years old, former Marine Scout sniper attached to Caleb's unit during a joint operation near the Pakistani border. Smart kid, tough as steel, reminded Caleb too much of himself years earlier. The mission went sideways fast. Bad intel, hidden explosives. Lucas never made it onto the extraction helicopter, and no matter what therapists or military counselors told him afterward, Caleb carried the same thought for years. You should have saved him. The guilt followed him home from the war and poisoned everything slowly. His marriage, his sleep, his temper, his ability to feel close to anyone. Even now, years later, loud sounds still made his muscles tense automatically. Crowded places suffocated him. Nightmares dragged him awake soaked in sweat while Ghost pressed against his chest until reality returned. Some days Caleb wondered if Diane had divorced him because she stopped loving him. Other days he knew the truth. She had simply grown tired of living beside a ghost. The rain finally eased as the truck climbed higher into the mountains. A battered wooden sign emerged through the fog. Pine Hollow. Population 1,482. Caleb slowed as he passed through the tiny town. A diner glowed softly near the road. A gas station sat dark beside an empty feed store. Old pickup trucks lined the sidewalks beneath flickering streetlights. The town looked frozen in another decade, isolated beneath the enormous black silhouette of the mountains. People here probably knew each other's grandparents. People here remembered things. That thought tightened Caleb's chest unexpectedly. His father had lived here almost his entire life. Harold Mercer, mechanic, Korean War veteran, stubborn as hell. Caleb hadn't spoken to him in nearly 8 years before the old man died. The regret of that sat heavier than the divorce. He and Harold had once been close, back when Caleb was a boy handing wrenches across grease-stained workbenches, back when summer evenings smelled like gasoline and sawdust instead of whiskey and silence. But military service changed him. War changed him. And Harold Mercer had never been a man who understood silence. Their arguments grew sharper over the years. Calls became less frequent. Visits stopped altogether. Pride settled between them like a wall neither man knew how to tear down. Then one winter morning, Caleb got the call. Heart attack. Gone before the ambulance reached Missoula. Caleb never made it to the funeral. He told himself deployment prevented it. But deep down, he knew the truth. Shame had kept him away. Ghost rested his muzzle on Caleb's knee again as the truck left town and climbed another narrow road through dense forest. A few miles later, headlights illuminated an old weathered sign half swallowed by weeds. Mercer Garage and Service. Caleb's chest tightened instantly. There it was, the place he had spent half his childhood. The garage sat alone beside the mountain road, surrounded by towering pines and abandoned fuel pumps rusted by time. Moonlight broke through drifting clouds, casting pale silver across cracked concrete and faded brick walls. The building looked smaller than he remembered, older, tired, like it had been waiting too long for someone to come home. Caleb killed the engine. Silence flooded the mountains. Only the ticking of the cooling motor and distant wind through the trees remained. For a long moment, neither he nor Ghost moved. Then Ghost stood slowly in the passenger seat. The dog's posture changed instantly, alert, focused. Caleb frowned. What is it? Ghost stared directly at the garage. Not casually, not curiously, intensely. A low growl rumbled deep inside his chest. Caleb reached beneath the seat automatically and wrapped his hand around the flashlight he kept there. Old instincts awakened quietly inside him. Years of combat had trained him to trust changes in Ghost's behavior without hesitation. The dog never reacted without reason. Caleb stepped out into the freezing night air. The mountains loomed around him like dark giants. Pine trees swayed above the garage roof while mist drifted low across the ground. Ghost jumped from the truck and immediately moved ahead of him. Silent. Controlled. The dog circled the building once, nose working aggressively. Caleb approached the front entrance slowly. The old metal key Harold's lawyer mailed him felt ice cold in his palm. He stared at the garage door for several seconds before finally sliding the key into the lock. His hand trembled slightly, not from cold, from memory. The lock resisted at first, then clicked. The sound echoed strangely in the stillness. Caleb pulled the heavy door open a few inches. Darkness waited inside. Dust, oil, old metal. The smell hit him immediately. For one brief moment, he was 12 years old again, standing beside his father under warm shop lights, while old country music played through a radio somewhere in the background. Then Ghost suddenly stepped forward. The German shepherd froze. Every muscle in his body tightened. A deep growl rolled from his throat as his eyes locked onto the far repair bay, hidden inside the darkness, like someone was already standing there watching them. And Caleb felt the hair rise slowly on the back of his neck. The mountains had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause in the trees behind him. Ghost moved first. The German shepherd stepped through the narrow opening of the garage door with slow, deliberate movements, his paws silent against the stained concrete floor. His growl deepened as he stared into the darkness ahead. Caleb tightened his grip on the flashlight. Years of military training returned instantly, sliding over him like old armor. His breathing slowed. His senses sharpened. Every shadow inside the garage suddenly carried weight. He pushed the heavy door open wider. The beam of light cut through floating dust particles and darkness. Nothing moved. Rows of rusted tools lined the far walls. Old hydraulic lifts stood frozen like skeletal machines abandoned decades earlier. Shelves sagged beneath oil cans, cracked fan belts, and faded cardboard boxes. But Ghost wasn't relaxing. The dog advanced farther into the garage, ears pinned forward. Watching, listening. Caleb followed carefully. The smell hit him harder now. Motor oil, cold steel, old wood, grease buried deep into concrete after 50 years of repairs. It smelled exactly like his childhood. His flashlight passed over a faded Coca-Cola machine near the entrance. An ancient tire rack leaned crooked against the wall. Dust-covered calendars from the late 1990s still hung near the office window. Time had stopped here. Caleb swallowed hard. For a moment, he could almost hear his father's voice echoing through the garage. "Hand me the half-inch wrench, boy." The memory landed in his chest with painful force. Ghost suddenly stopped near the center repair bay. The growling ceased. Now the dog simply stared. Caleb swept the flashlight toward the far corner. Nothing. Just darkness and an old welding station bolted to the floor beside the rear wall. He exhaled slowly. "Probably rats," he muttered. But Ghost did not move. Caleb knew better than to ignore that. He stepped farther inside, boots crunching softly over broken glass and scattered debris. The flashlight beam slid across framed photographs hanging crooked near the office door. One picture made him stop completely. Harold Mercer stood beside a younger Caleb in front of the garage sometime in the late 70s. Caleb couldn't have been older than 10. Both of them smiled proudly beside an old cherry-red pickup they had restored together. Caleb stared at the photo for a long time. He barely recognized himself. Back then, his world had still made sense. Before war, before funerals, before marriages turned cold, before silence became easier than conversation. Ghost finally relaxed enough to move away from the repair bay. He circled the garage slowly, sniffing everything with intense focus. Caleb continued exploring. The office door creaked loudly when he pushed it open. A small room appeared beyond it, cramped and frozen in another era. A battered desk sat beneath dusty windows. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A coffee mug still rested beside an old radio covered in grime. Harold's brown work jacket hung from a hook near the door. Caleb froze again. The sight of it hurt more than he expected. The jacket looked as though his father might walk in any second, shrug it on, and complain about customers refusing to change their oil on time. Caleb stepped closer slowly. The fabric was stiff with age when he touched it. He remembered that jacket. Harold wore it every winter. The old man always smelled like cedar soap, gasoline, and cigarette smoke. Caleb shut his eyes briefly. A sudden memory surfaced. Snow falling outside this same office window. Harold sitting behind the desk counting receipts. Young Caleb asleep in a chair after helping close the garage late one night. "You work hard enough," Harold had said quietly back then. "This place'll always take care of you." Caleb opened his eyes again. The words hit differently now, because the garage was all he had left. A sharp bark echoed from the main bay. Ghost. Caleb spun immediately and hurried back outside the office. Ghost stood beside the old welding station again. The dog scratched aggressively at the floor near the base of the machine. Claws scraping concrete. Caleb frowned. "What is it?" Ghost barked once more and lowered his nose against the floor. Caleb crouched beside him and swept the flashlight downward. The concrete looked uneven there. Not badly. Just enough to notice if someone stared carefully. A faint metal edge barely showed beneath layers of grease and dirt. Caleb touched it slowly. Cold steel, buried under concrete dust. His pulse quickened slightly. "What the hell?" Ghost whined softly. Caleb examined the welding station closer. The bolts anchoring it to the floor were old, but cleaner than everything else around them, as if someone had removed them at some point, long after the rest of the garage stopped operating. A strange feeling settled into Caleb's stomach, like the building itself was trying to tell him something. Thunder rolled outside again. The storm finally reached the mountains. Rain hammered suddenly against the roof overhead, while cold wind rattled loose sheet metal somewhere outside. Ghost moved closer beside him. Always close, always guarding. Caleb stood slowly. "Not tonight," he said quietly. Exhaustion weighed too heavily on him now. He hadn't slept properly in days. His body ached from driving. His mind felt scraped raw. Whatever lay beneath that welding station could wait until morning. He grabbed his duffel bag from the truck while rain poured across the empty road outside. Lightning flashed over the mountains, illuminating endless black forests surrounding the garage. The isolation of the place settled heavily around him now. No nearby houses, no passing traffic. Only mountains, trees, darkness, and memories. By midnight, the storm had fully swallowed Pine Hollow. Caleb sat alone inside the office beneath the weak glow of an old desk lamp he somehow managed to coax back to life. Rainwater streaked the windows while Ghost slept on the floor nearby, though one ear remained alert to every sound. Caleb opened a can of soup over a portable burner and forced himself to eat. The silence inside the garage pressed against him. Normally, he preferred silence. After years of combat and crowded cities, silence often felt safer than people. But this silence felt different. Heavy, occupied. Like the garage remembered too much. Ghost suddenly lifted his head. Caleb looked up instantly. The dog stared toward the back repair bay again, listening. Caleb held still. At first he heard nothing beyond rain on the roof, then a metallic creak echoed faintly somewhere deeper inside the building. Caleb's muscles tightened automatically. Ghost rose silently to his feet. The creak came again, slow, dragging, like old metal shifting under weight. Caleb reached beneath the desk and grabbed the combat knife he kept in his duffel bag. Ghost moved beside him immediately. Together they stepped back into the dark garage. Lightning flashed through the high windows. The shadows jumped violently. Caleb swept the flashlight across the repair bays. Nothing. The welding station sat exactly where it had before. Old chains hanging near the hydraulic lift swayed slightly from the draft moving through the building. Then Ghost growled again. Low. Dangerous. The dog moved toward the rear wall beside the welding station. Caleb followed carefully. Another lightning flash exploded outside, and for one split second, Caleb thought he saw movement near the far office window. A figure. Gone instantly. He rushed forward and shoved open the side door leading outside. Cold rain slammed into him. The mountains beyond the garage were pitch black beneath the storm. No vehicles, no lights, no footsteps, nothing. Ghost bolted outside anyway, racing around the side of the building with military precision. Caleb followed through mud and rain, heart pounding harder now. But they found no one. Only wet gravel, towering pines, and darkness stretching endlessly through the Bitterroot wilderness. Ghost finally returned several minutes later, soaked and restless. Caleb studied the tree line uneasily. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe his nerves were shot. Or maybe somebody truly had been watching the garage. Watching him, back inside, Caleb locked every door he could find. Ghost refused to settle far from the welding station. The dog eventually lay directly beside it, head resting on massive paws, while his eyes remained fixed on the darkness. Caleb spread an old army blanket across the office cot and sat heavily against the wall. Rain continued hammering the roof. The storm showed no signs of stopping. He rubbed both hands over his face slowly. Everything hurt. His marriage was gone. His home was gone. His father was dead. And now he was sleeping inside a decaying mountain garage haunted by memories he had spent decades trying to outrun. Ghost looked toward him quietly. Caleb stared back at the dog. You know something I don't you? Ghost blinked once, then rested his head back down beside the welding station, as if guarding whatever waited beneath it. And sometime after 2 a.m, exhaustion finally dragged Caleb into sleep. But peace never followed him there. The nightmare came fast. Afghanistan. Gunfire cracking through narrow village streets, smoke choking the air, men screaming over the radio. Caleb running through burning wreckage while Ghost barked somewhere ahead. Then Lucas Hale again, bleeding, dying, reaching toward him. You left me there? Caleb jerked awake violently with a strangled gasp. The office was dark except for flashes of lightning outside. His chest heaved, sweat soaked through his shirt. For one terrible second, he didn't know where he was. Then Ghost climbed onto the cot beside him. The German shepherd pressed his weight firmly against Caleb's chest until his breathing slowed. Caleb gripped the dog's thick fur tightly. Outside, thunder rolled across the Bitterroot Mountains, and somewhere inside the garage, beneath decades of dust and silence, something metallic echoed softly beneath the floor. Caleb lay motionless on the narrow cot inside the office. Ghost remained pressed against his side, ears raised toward the darkness beyond the office door. Another faint sound drifted through the garage. A scrape. Then silence again. Caleb slowly reached for the combat knife resting beside the cot. His breathing steadied automatically. Old instincts returned fast in moments like this. Years of missions had trained his body to wake instantly, halfway between sleep and combat readiness. Ghost stood first. The German shepherd moved toward the office doorway with slow, silent steps. Lightning flashed through the dirty windows, briefly illuminating the vast repair bay outside. Empty. Still. But Caleb no longer trusted stillness. Not after war. Not after tonight. He followed Ghost into the garage carefully, flashlight cutting across shadows and hanging chains. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded almost like distant gunfire. Ghost stopped beside the welding station again. The dog lowered his head and growled quietly at the concrete floor. Caleb crouched beside him. There it was again, a faint metallic tapping somewhere underneath. 3 slow knocks, then nothing. Caleb touched the cold floor. The concrete vibrated slightly beneath his fingertips before going still again. His jaw tightened. Whatever sat beneath that welding station was larger than he first thought, but exhaustion dragged at him harder now. His body ached from the drive, and the nightmare still clung to his nerves like smoke. Morning would come soon enough, and daylight made old places easier to face. "Tomorrow," he whispered. Ghost looked at him uncertainly, but finally stepped away from the floor. By dawn, the storm had moved east. Cold gray light filtered through the garage windows, while fog drifted low across the mountains outside. Caleb stood beside the old utility sink, splashing icy water onto his face. The reflection staring back from the cracked mirror looked older than 58. Harder, too. Silver threaded heavily through his dark hair now. Deep lines framed his eyes. His shoulders remained broad from decades of military discipline, but exhaustion hung over him like a physical weight. Ghost waited nearby, watching him patiently. "You look worse than me," Caleb muttered. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the Bitterroot Valley slowly emerged beneath pale morning light. Endless pine forests stretched across the mountains, while low clouds clung to distant ridgelines. Beautiful country, but isolated enough for secrets to disappear inside it. Caleb grabbed his truck keys. He needed supplies, food, fuel, tools, and maybe answers. Ghost jumped into the passenger seat as the old Ford rumbled to life. The drive into Pine Hollow took less than 15 minutes. Morning had fully awakened the small mountain town now. Pickup trucks lined the streets. Locals moved between the hardware store, post office, and feed supply warehouse beneath drifting chimney smoke and cold autumn sunlight. People noticed Caleb immediately. Small towns always noticed strangers, especially strangers who carried themselves like soldiers. Caleb parked outside a weathered diner near the edge of town. Cedar Ridge Diner. The old sign creaked gently in the mountain wind. Ghost leaped from the truck beside him. Several people standing outside paused when they saw the German Shepherd. Ghost ignored them completely, staying close beside Caleb's leg as they entered the diner together. Warmth wrapped around them instantly. The smell of coffee, bacon grease, and fresh biscuits filled the air. Country music played softly through ceiling speakers, while locals sat inside worn booths talking quietly over breakfast. Conversations slowed the moment Caleb walked in. He felt it immediately. The weight of unfamiliar eyes. A waitress near the counter looked up first. She couldn't have been older than 43 or 44. Dark blonde hair fell loosely over one shoulder, while tired blue eyes studied Caleb carefully. There was kindness in her face, but also caution shaped by hardship. She noticed Ghost instantly. "Well," she said softly, "that's a serious-looking dog." Caleb nodded once. "He's retired military." The waitress glanced toward Ghost again. The dog stood perfectly still beside Caleb, alert but calm. "What's his name?" "Ghost." Something flickered across her expression at that name. Then she smiled faintly. "I'm Claire Donovan. Sit wherever you want." Caleb chose a booth near the window. Ghost settled beside him automatically. Claire brought coffee a few minutes later. "You passing through?" she asked. Caleb hesitated. "Not exactly." He glanced toward the mountains beyond town. "My father owned Mercer Garage outside Pine Hollow." Claire froze slightly. "Harold Mercer?" Caleb nodded. For the first time since arriving in Montana, he saw genuine warmth cross someone's face. "Your father helped half this valley at one point or another," Claire said quietly. "Folks around here still talk about him." Something tightened painfully inside Caleb's chest. Claire leaned lightly against the booth. "You're Caleb." It wasn't a question. "You've got his eyes." Caleb looked down at his coffee. "That's what people used to say." Claire studied him carefully now. The wedding ring was gone from his hand, but the pale mark remained. The exhaustion beneath his eyes wasn't difficult to notice either. You staying up at the garage? For now. That place has been empty a long time. Yeah. An awkward silence followed. Then a young boy appeared near the kitchen doorway, maybe 10 years old, thin, quiet, dark hair hanging over nervous eyes. He stared at Ghost cautiously. Ghost immediately noticed him. The German shepherd's posture softened. The boy stepped closer. Can I pet him? He asked quietly. Caleb nodded once. If he comes to you first. Ghost walked slowly toward the child and gently nudged his hand with his nose. The boy smiled faintly for the first time. Claire watched them with visible surprise. He doesn't usually warm up to strangers, she admitted softly. What's his name? Caleb asked. Eli. The boy scratched carefully behind Ghost's ears. He's huge. Ghost leaned gently into the touch. Caleb noticed something immediately. The kid carried sadness the same way wounded soldiers did. Quietly. Deep inside themselves. Claire seemed to notice Caleb noticing. My husband died 2 years ago, she said softly. Logging accident up near Lost Creek Pass. Caleb nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Claire gave a small shrug like someone long accustomed to surviving grief alone. Eli hasn't talked much since. But Ghost remained beside the boy calmly, tail moving slowly against the floor. For several minutes, the diner almost felt peaceful, normal. Then Caleb noticed the trucks outside. 2 black SUVs parked across the street. New vehicles, expensive, out of place in Pine Hollow, and both drivers were watching the diner. Caleb's military instincts sharpened immediately. One of the men stood near the trucks smoking a cigarette. Tall, clean haircut, expensive boots. The kind of posture Caleb recognized instantly. Not military exactly, but trained, disciplined, dangerous. Ghost noticed them too. The German shepherd moved closer to Caleb's booth and stared through the window silently. Claire followed Caleb's gaze. Her expression changed immediately. You know them? No. But they've been parked there a while. Caleb kept watching. The smoking man said something quietly to the second man standing near the SUV. Then Caleb saw it. The second man looked directly toward him, cold eyes, expressionless. And then, through the glass, Caleb watched the man lean closer and whisper something to his partner. The smoker glanced toward the diner again, toward Caleb, toward Ghost. Then both men climbed back into their vehicles. The engines started, but they didn't drive away. They simply waited, watching. Ghost gave a low growl beneath the table. Claire crossed her arms uneasily. Something wrong? Caleb didn't answer immediately, because deep down he already knew. People didn't drive expensive black SUVs into isolated mountain towns for no reason, and they definitely didn't sit outside diners watching abandoned garages, unless they were looking for something. Or someone. Finally, Caleb stood. I should get moving. Claire frowned slightly. You barely touched your breakfast. I'll come back. He reached for his wallet, but Claire stopped him. Your father once fixed my husband's truck for free during a snowstorm, she said quietly. Said nobody should get stranded in these mountains. Caleb hesitated, then nodded once. Thank you. Outside, cold mountain wind swept through the valley. Ghost stayed unusually close as they crossed toward the truck. The black SUVs remained parked at the curb. Caleb could feel the men watching him through tinted windows. He opened the truck door slowly. Then one of the SUV windows lowered halfway. A man's voice drifted across the cold air. Looks like Mercer's son finally came back for it. Caleb turned slowly. The man behind the wheel smiled faintly. But there was no warmth in it. Only recognition. And something else. Expectation. Ghost's growl deepened beside him, while somewhere far back in Caleb Mercer's mind, the memory of metal knocking beneath the garage floor echoed once again. The man inside the SUV kept smiling. Not friendly. Not threatening either. Just confident. like he knew something Caleb didn't. Cold mountain wind swept through Pine Hollow as the black SUVs idled quietly along the curb. Townspeople nearby pretended not to stare, but Caleb noticed them watching from storefront windows and parked trucks. Small towns sensed tension quickly. Ghost stepped closer against Caleb's leg, ears forward, eyes locked on the vehicle. The man behind the wheel finally spoke again. "Beautiful property your father left you." Caleb's expression hardened. "You knew Harold?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Everybody around here knew Harold Mercer." Then the window rolled shut. A second later, both SUVs pulled away from the diner and disappeared slowly down Main Street. Ghost continued staring after them long after the vehicles vanished. Caleb climbed into the truck without another word. Something had shifted now. The garage no longer felt abandoned. It felt noticed, watched, and whatever lay hidden beneath that welding station clearly mattered to somebody besides Harold Mercer. The drive back through the mountains felt colder somehow. Gray clouds hung low over the Bitterroots while pine forests stretched endlessly beneath early snowfall, dusting the ridgelines. The beauty of the valley felt deceptive now. Too quiet, too isolated, perfect for secrets. Ghost remained alert the entire drive. No resting, no relaxing. Every few minutes the dog checked the mirrors or stared into the tree line as though expecting pursuit. Caleb understood the feeling. Combat dogs sensed tension long before humans admitted it existed. By the time they reached the garage, the sky had darkened toward late afternoon. Caleb killed the engine and sat silently for a moment. The old building looked different now. Yesterday it had seemed forgotten. Today it looked like a vault. Ghost jumped from the truck first and immediately circled the property. Caleb unlocked the garage door carefully and stepped inside. Cold air carried the familiar smells of rust, oil, and old wood, but now another scent lingered faintly beneath it. Cigarette smoke. Fresh. Caleb froze. His eyes narrowed slowly. Someone had been inside. Recently. Ghost entered behind him and immediately picked up the scent too. The German Shepherd moved through the garage with focused intensity, nose low against the floor. Caleb scanned the room carefully. Nothing obvious appeared disturbed. The office remained untouched. The old tool walls still sat buried beneath dust. But when he reached the welding station, he stopped cold. Fresh scrape marks cut across the concrete near the bolts. Someone else had tried moving it. Ghost barked sharply beside him. "Easy," Caleb whispered. But his own pulse had already quickened. The SUVs, the strange man. The noises under the floor. Now this. The pieces were beginning to connect into something Caleb didn't yet understand. He crouched beside the welding station slowly. The machine itself was ancient. Heavy steel. Probably installed sometime in the 60s. Thick electrical cables disappeared into the concrete while rust coated nearly every visible surface. Except the bolts. Those looked newer, cleaner, recently handled. Caleb grabbed an old breaker bar from the tool wall. For a brief second, memories flooded him again. Summer afternoons beside Harold. Learning leverage. Learning patience. "Machines always tell the truth," his father used to say. "People don't." Caleb positioned the breaker bar over the first bolt and pushed hard. The metal groaned loudly. Ghost moved beside the garage door immediately, standing guard while Caleb worked. One bolt loosened, then another. Dust filled the air. Sweat rolled down Caleb's neck despite the cold. The welding station hadn't moved in years, but underneath the rust and grease someone had maintained access to it. That realization unsettled him deeply. Who and why? Outside, the wind strengthened through the trees. Cloud shadows swept across the garage windows while daylight slowly faded. After nearly 40 minutes of work, Caleb finally managed to shift the massive welding station several inches across the floor. A sharp metallic sound echoed beneath it. Ghost barked instantly. There. Embedded beneath layers of dirt and concrete dust sat a rectangular steel hatch roughly 3 feet long. Caleb stared at it silently. His father had hidden something under the garage floor. Something important enough to bury beneath half a ton of steel machinery. Ghost pawed excitedly at the hatch. Caleb brushed away years of grime with his sleeve until a rusted pull ring became visible. His hand hesitated over it. Every instinct told him opening that compartment would change everything. The mountains outside had grown dark now. Wind rattled the old garage windows. For one strange moment, Caleb almost imagined Harold standing nearby, watching silently from the shadows. Then Caleb grabbed the ring and pulled. The hatch resisted, then slowly creaked upward. Cold air escaped from below, carrying the smell of paper, oil, and damp earth. Ghost leaned forward immediately. Caleb aimed the flashlight inside. A narrow steel compartment stretched beneath the floor, and it was full. Leather-bound journals stacked neatly against one side. Military-style document cases. Old cassette tapes sealed in plastic bags. Bundles of cash wrapped in yellowed bank paper. Photographs, folders, files. Dozens of them. Caleb's heartbeat slowed into that strange calm soldiers sometimes felt before danger. Not panic. Recognition. Whatever Harold Mercer hid down there wasn't random. It was organized, deliberate. Years of secrecy carefully preserved beneath the garage floor. Caleb reached down slowly and lifted the nearest journal into the light. Harold Mercer. Personal Records, 1998. His father's handwriting covered the front. Precise. Controlled. Caleb swallowed hard. Ghost stood rigid beside him now, staring toward the garage entrance again. Always watching. Caleb opened the journal carefully. The first pages looked harmless enough. Repair notes, names, dates, fuel invoices. Then the writing changed. October 14th, 1998. Saw Wade Granger meeting county officials near Black Creek site again tonight. Lucas says they're moving chemicals through the valley after dark. Caleb frowned instantly. Lucas? Lucas Hale? He turned more pages. November 2nd. Another veteran disappeared this week. Sheriff says hunting accident. Nobody believes it anymore. Caleb's chest tightened. He flipped faster now. December 18th. Water tests came back contaminated again. Families downstream are getting sick. Black Creek paid the county to bury it. A cold feeling spread slowly through him. This wasn't just a journal. It was evidence. Years of it. Ghost suddenly growled low. Caleb looked up immediately. The dog stood facing the front windows, motionless, focused. Then came the sound. Crunch. Gravel outside. Someone walking near the garage. Caleb killed the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the building. Ghost remained perfectly silent now, body tense beside him. Another crunch outside. Slow footsteps. Caleb moved quietly toward the side of the welding station and crouched low. Military instincts took over automatically. Assess exits, locate threat, control breathing. The footsteps stopped outside the garage door. For several seconds, only wind moved through the mountains. Then a shadow crossed the dirty front window. Human. Watching inside. Ghost's lips curled back silently. Caleb stayed motionless. The shadow lingered another moment, then disappeared. A vehicle door slammed outside. Engine noise followed seconds later. Caleb rose carefully and moved toward the front entrance just in time to see taillights vanish down the mountain road through the trees. Not the SUVs this time. An older truck. No plates visible. Ghost barked once sharply into the darkness. Caleb locked the garage immediately afterward. His hands moved faster now. His mind faster too. Whatever Harold uncovered had frightened people badly enough to keep searching for it even after his death. And somehow Caleb had just walked directly into the middle of it. Back near the compartment, he continued searching through the hidden cache. One photograph stopped him cold. 3 men stood beside a riverbank near heavy equipment. One of them was Harold. The second man Caleb recognized instantly despite the years. Lucas Hale. Older than Caleb remembered him from Afghanistan. Alive, smiling beside Harold. The third man's face had been scratched violently out of the photo. Ghost whined softly beside him. Caleb turned the picture over slowly. Only 4 words were written on the back in Harold's handwriting. They know who did it. Caleb stared at the words while cold wind moaned softly outside the garage. Then he heard it again. Far off down the mountain road. An engine. Returning. And Ghost moved instantly toward the darkness with a growl that sounded almost human. The engine noise climbed slowly up the mountain road outside Mercer Garage. Caleb killed the flashlight again and crouched beside the open compartment beneath the welding station. Cold air drifted through cracks in the old building, while Ghost stood rigid near the front entrance, every muscle tight beneath his thick fur. Headlights swept briefly across the garage windows, then disappeared. The vehicle stopped outside. Caleb's pulse slowed into the same controlled rhythm he remembered from deployment nights overseas. Strange how quickly old instincts returned. Years could pass, but the body never forgot danger. Ghost looked back toward him once, waiting, listening. A car door opened outside. Footsteps crunched softly across wet gravel, not hurried, confident. Caleb quietly slid the journals and photographs back into the hidden compartment, leaving only one cassette tape tucked inside his jacket pocket. The footsteps stopped near the garage door. Then came 3 slow knocks. Caleb remained silent. Another knock followed. "Mr. Mercer?" a voice called calmly through the door. "I know you're in there." Ghost barked sharply. Caleb stood slowly and moved toward the entrance. The voice continued. "My name's Wade Granger. I think we should talk." Caleb unlocked the door halfway, but kept the heavy chain latched across it. Cold mountain air rushed inside. A tall man stood beneath the dim exterior light, beside a black SUV parked near the pumps. Mid-50s maybe. Clean-cut gray hair, expensive wool coat, calm eyes that missed nothing. The kind of man who looked respectable until you studied him longer. Another man remained near the SUV behind him, hands tucked inside a dark jacket, watching. Wade offered a polite smile. "Sorry to bother you so late." "You found me anyway," Caleb replied flatly. Wade nodded slightly as though acknowledging a fair point. Word travels fast in small towns. Ghost stood directly beside Caleb now, lips curled back low enough to expose teeth. Wade noticed immediately. "Beautiful dog," he said. "Military?" "Yes." "Explains the manners." Ghost growled harder. Wade's smile faded slightly. "I'll get straight to the point. Black Creek Mining owns land throughout this valley. Your garage sits in the middle of property we're trying to acquire." Caleb leaned against the doorframe silently. "We're prepared to make a generous offer," Wade continued. "Enough for you to start over comfortably somewhere else." Caleb studied him carefully. There it was. Not a request, a removal. "You drove all the way up here at night to buy a rundown garage?" Wade's eyes sharpened almost invisibly. "Your father and I had disagreements years ago. I'd prefer not to continue them." The words settled heavily between them. Ghost suddenly lunged against the door with a savage bark that startled even the second man near the SUV. Wade stepped back immediately. Caleb grabbed Ghost's collar. "Easy." But Ghost kept staring directly at Wade. Pure hostility. Animals sensed things people ignored. Wade adjusted his coat calmly, though tension now tightened his jaw. "Mr. Mercer," he said quietly, "some things buried in this valley should stay buried." Then he reached into his pocket and slid a business card through the opening in the chained door. "Think about the offer." Caleb glanced at the card. Black Creek Mineral Development, Wade Granger. Regional Director. No phone number, only an address in Missoula. Wade stepped backward toward the SUV. "One more thing," he added. Caleb said nothing. "Your father had a habit of holding on to dangerous ideas long after everyone else moved on." The mountain wind howled softly through the trees. Ghost remained motionless beside Caleb, watching, waiting. Wade gave a final nod before climbing into the SUV. Moments later, the headlights disappeared back down the road into darkness. Caleb locked the garage immediately afterward. Something about Wade Granger unsettled him deeply. Not because the man acted openly threatening, because he acted patient. Men like that were always more dangerous. Ghost paced the garage restlessly for nearly 20 minutes afterward, checking doors and windows repeatedly before finally settling beside the welding station again. Caleb sat heavily in the office chair and stared at the cassette tape in his hand. Dust coated the faded label. Harold. Personal recording number 14, his father's handwriting. Caleb found an old tape player buried inside one of the desk drawers after nearly an hour of searching. Surprisingly, it still worked after he cleaned the battery terminals. Outside, night swallowed the mountains completely. The only light inside the garage came from the desk lamp glowing weakly beside him. Ghost lay near the office doorway, still alert. Caleb inserted the cassette carefully. Static crackled through the tiny speaker. Then his father's voice filled the room. Older, tired, but unmistakably Harold Mercer. "If anybody's listening to this," the recording began, "then things probably got worse than I hoped they would." Caleb froze. He hadn't heard his father's voice in nearly a decade. The sound alone nearly broke something inside him. Harold continued. "Black Creek keeps buying land through the valley. Folks think it's about mining permits, but that's only part of it." Paper rustled faintly in the background of the recording. "I've seen trucks moving through the mountains at night for years now. Chemicals, waste barrels, things they don't want anybody asking questions about." Caleb leaned closer. Ghost raised his head slightly. "Lucas Hale helped me document some of it," Harold said. "Good kid, smart, former Marine. Reminded me too much of my son." Caleb shut his eyes briefly. Lucas again. Alive at some point after Afghanistan. Working with Harold. The tape hissed softly. "3 veterans have died in this valley over the last 6 years," Harold continued. "Officially, they were accidents, hunting falls, vehicle crashes, exposure, but Lucas found connections between all of them and Black Creek property purchases." Caleb's chest tightened slowly. The old tape crackled again. Then came several seconds of silence. When Harold finally spoke again, his voice sounded lower, more afraid. "If they're hearing this," he said quietly, "then I'm probably already dead." The recording ended abruptly. Only static remained. Caleb sat motionless. The office suddenly felt colder. Ghost walked over quietly and rested his head against Caleb's knee. For several long moments, Caleb simply stared at the dead tape recorder. His father had known he was in danger, known people were watching him. And instead of going to the police, Harold hid evidence beneath the garage floor like a man preparing for war. Outside, wind rattled the building hard enough to shake loose dust from the rafters. Caleb rubbed both hands slowly across his face. His exhaustion had vanished completely now. Adrenaline replaced it. Questions multiplied rapidly inside his head. Who exactly was Lucas Hale working with after Afghanistan? How had he ended up connected to Harold? And why would a mining company care so desperately about an abandoned garage? Ghost suddenly lifted his head again. A vehicle approached outside. Fast. Caleb stood instantly. But this time the headlights belonged to an old sheriff's truck climbing the mountain road. The truck stopped near the pumps and a broad older man climbed out beneath the floodlight. Sheriff's jacket, gray beard, heavy build. Ghost relaxed slightly. The man approached slowly, hands visible. "You Caleb Mercer?" he called. Caleb opened the garage door cautiously. "That depends who's asking." The man gave a tired smile. Sheriff Ben Holloway. He extended a hand. Caleb shook it after a moment. Ben glanced around the garage. Thought I saw Wade Granger's vehicles heading down from here. Caleb watched him carefully. You know him? Sheriff Holloway sighed heavily. Everybody around Pine Hollow knows Wade. The way he said it carried weight, like an old problem nobody managed to solve. Ben noticed Ghost watching him carefully. Beautiful shepherd, he said quietly. Military dog? Retired explosives and tracking. Explains the eyes. Ghost stepped closer beside Caleb anyway. Ben lowered his voice. Listen carefully, Caleb. Folks around here don't trust Black Creek much, but they've got money tied into half the county. Lawyers, too. Why warn me? The sheriff looked toward the dark mountains surrounding the garage. Because your father was a good man. Silence settled briefly. Then Ben added quietly, and because strange things started happening again the minute you came back. Caleb felt the cold deepen around him. The sheriff studied him another moment before stepping backward toward his truck. Lock your doors tonight, he said, and don't trust everybody in Pine Hollow just because they smile at you. Then he drove away into the darkness, leaving Caleb standing beside the old garage with Ghost pressed close against his leg. The mountains loomed silently around them, and somewhere beneath the welding station floor, Harold Mercer's hidden secrets waited patiently in the dark. Caleb barely slept that night. Every creak of the old garage pulled him awake. Every gust of wind through the bitterroot pines sounded like approaching tires on gravel. The cassette tape replayed endlessly in his mind. Harold's tired voice warning about dead veterans, poisoned water, and people who buried truth beneath the mountains. Ghost never fully rested either. The German shepherd remained near the front windows most of the night, lifting his head at every distant sound beyond the tree line. By dawn, snow clouds had swallowed the upper ridges. Cold gray light filtered through the garage windows, while Caleb sat at the office desk studying Harold's journals. Names filled the pages. Dates, property records, handwritten notes connecting Black Creek mining to land purchases stretching across the valley. One name appeared repeatedly. Lucas Hale. Caleb rubbed tired eyes. He still couldn't fully understand it. Lucas had died overseas. At least that was what Caleb had believed for nearly 15 years. But Harold's journals suggested otherwise. A sharp bark from Ghost pulled him from his thoughts. The dog stood near the garage entrance, staring outside. Caleb looked up. Snow had started falling. Thin flakes drifted sideways through growing mountain wind, while dark clouds rolled heavily over Pine Hollow. The storm moving toward the valley looked dangerous. Then Caleb heard it. A truck engine racing hard up the road. Moments later, Claire Donovan's old blue pickup slid into the garage lot, tires throwing slush across the gravel. She jumped out before the engine fully stopped, panic written across her face. Caleb! Ghost immediately moved toward her. Something was wrong. Claire hurried inside, breathing hard from cold and fear. It's Eli, she said. Caleb stood instantly. What happened? He's gone. The words landed like ice. Claire's voice trembled now. He got upset at school this morning. Some boys cornered him behind the gym again. She swallowed hard. One of the teachers said he ran toward the forest trails near Miller Creek. Caleb looked toward the mountains. The storm was worsening fast. How long? Almost an hour. Fear filled her eyes now. The sheriff's looking, but the snow's getting heavier. Ghost paced immediately, sensing urgency in her voice. Caleb grabbed his jacket. Show me where. Claire blinked. You'd help? Caleb looked at her like the question itself surprised him. Of course. 10 minutes later, they drove through falling snow toward the eastern forest trails outside Pine Hollow. Wind rattled the truck violently as visibility worsened across the narrow mountain roads. Ghost sat upright between them, alert and focused. Claire gripped the steering wheel tightly. He used to love those woods before his father died, she whispered. After the accident, he stopped talking much. Caleb stared through the windshield. He understood silence too well. The truck finally reached a trailhead near Miller Creek, where sheriff vehicles already sat buried beneath growing snowdrifts. Deputies searched along the tree line, while Sheriff Holloway spoke urgently into a radio. The sheriff looked relieved when he saw Ghost. "Thank God," he muttered. Ghost jumped from the truck before Caleb even spoke. The German Shepherd immediately lowered his nose into the snow. Tracking mode. Every part of the dog changed instantly. Focused, precise, professional. Caleb clipped on Ghost's long field leash while Sheriff Holloway approached. "We lost Eli's footprints near the creek crossing," Ben explained. "Storm's covering everything too fast." "How cold tonight?" Caleb asked. "Single digits by dark." Claire shut her eyes briefly. Caleb crouched beside Ghost. "You find him, buddy." Ghost sniffed the boy's winter hat Claire handed over. Then the dog turned toward the forest, without hesitation, pulling hard. The trail climbed quickly into dense pine woods, where snowfall thickened beneath darkening skies. Wind moaned through branches overhead, while icy creek water rushed somewhere below the ridge. Ghost moved fast, despite the deepening snow. Caleb followed close behind, while Claire and two deputies struggled farther back. The farther they climbed, the quieter the world became. Only wind, snow, and Ghost's steady movement through the wilderness. Then Caleb saw it. Small boot prints beneath fresh snow near a fallen log. Eli. Ghost barked once sharply and surged forward. The trail narrowed beside steep ravines coated in ice. Snow-covered rocks crumbled beneath Caleb's boots, while old memories returned against his will. Afghanistan mountain passes. Search operations after explosions. Missing men. Cold fear tightening inside his chest. His breathing changed slightly. Ghost sensed it immediately. The dog slowed just enough to glance back at him, grounding him, keeping him present. Caleb exhaled slowly and kept moving. Half an hour later, the storm intensified into near whiteout conditions. Visibility dropped dangerously. Then Ghost stopped suddenly near the edge of Miller Creek. The old wooden bridge crossing the water had partially collapsed beneath ice and flood runoff. Broken boards dangled over roaring black water below. And on the opposite side of the creek stood Eli. The boy clung to a tree trunk, terrified and crying silently, while freezing rain soaked through his jacket. A section of the riverbank had collapsed behind him. He was trapped. "Eli!" Claire screamed from behind them. The boy looked up. Panic flooded his face. Then part of the muddy slope beneath him broke away into the creek. Ghost barked violently. Caleb moved instantly. "Stay back!" he shouted toward the others. The old bridge groaned dangerously as Caleb stepped onto it. Rotten wood cracked beneath his boots while freezing water roared below. Ghost followed without hesitation. Halfway across, another board snapped loose. Caleb nearly lost balance. The sound triggered something inside him. Suddenly, he wasn't on a bridge anymore. He was back overseas, crossing shattered concrete while gunfire exploded around him. Men screaming over radios, smoke, blood, Lucas falling. Caleb froze. For one terrible second, the memory swallowed him whole. Then Ghost barked directly into his face, sharp, demanding. The dog shoved hard against Caleb's leg. Present. Here. Now. Caleb blinked hard and forced air back into his lungs. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely. The bridge shook violently beneath them. No time. They crossed the remaining distance carefully and reached Eli seconds before another chunk of riverbank collapsed into the current. The boy threw himself against Caleb immediately. "I'm sorry," Eli sobbed. "I didn't mean to." "You're okay," Caleb said firmly. Ghost pressed against the child too, warming him with thick fur while Caleb wrapped Eli inside his own jacket. But the return crossing looked worse now. The bridge leaned dangerously toward the water. Wind screamed through the canyon. Sheriff Holloway shouted from the opposite bank. Hurry! Caleb lifted Eli carefully. Ghost moved ahead first, testing each section of the bridge with cautious steps. Then the center support beam cracked loudly. The bridge dropped several inches. Claire screamed. Caleb's pulse exploded. Without thinking, he lunged forward, carrying Eli while Ghost leaped beside them through blowing snow and flying splinters. The bridge collapsed behind them seconds later into the raging creek below. They hit solid ground hard. Ghost immediately turned back toward the river, barking furiously at the crashing debris. Eli clung tightly to Caleb's neck, shaking uncontrollably. Claire reached them moments later and pulled her son into her arms, crying openly now. "Thank you," she whispered over and over. Caleb stepped back, breathing heavily. Snow coated his jacket and beard. Ghost stood beside him proudly, tail wagging slightly despite exhaustion. Sheriff Holloway stared at the dog in disbelief. "That shepherd just saved all three of you." Caleb knelt beside Ghost and rubbed snow from the dog's face. Ghost licked his hand once. Simple, loyal, certain. The kind of loyalty human beings rarely deserved. As deputies escorted Eli and Claire back toward the trucks, the boy suddenly stopped and looked back at Caleb. Fear returned to his eyes. "There were trucks near your garage last night," Eli whispered quietly. Caleb stiffened. "What kind of trucks?" "Black ones." Snow swirled harder around them now. Eli lowered his voice even further. "I saw men shining flashlights around your building after dark." Claire looked confused, but Caleb felt cold settle deep into his chest, because Wade Granger hadn't stopped searching, not even during a mountain storm. Ghost growled softly beside him as if he understood exactly what that meant, and high above Pine Hollow, thunder rolled once more through the Bitterroot Mountains. The storm followed them all the way back into town. Snow and freezing rain lashed against the truck windshield while Caleb drove slowly down the mountain road, with Ghost sitting upright beside him. The German shepherd remained tense after the rescue, scanning the darkness outside as if expecting those black SUVs to emerge from the trees at any moment. Caleb's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Eli's words replayed in his mind. Men with flashlights around the garage. Not random trespassers. Not curious locals. Someone was searching for something, and now Caleb knew exactly what they wanted. The hidden compartment. Harold's journals. The evidence. By the time they reached Cedar Ridge Diner, the storm had worsened into sleet. Sheriff Holloway parked outside while deputies escorted Eli and Claire inside the warm diner. The boy still clung to Ghost. The German shepherd tolerated it patiently, standing like a silent guardian while Eli buried cold fingers into his fur. Claire looked at Caleb across the diner. "You saved my son." Caleb shook his head slightly. Ghost found him. But Claire's eyes held something deeper now. Trust. The kind Caleb hadn't felt from another person in years. Eli finally looked up at him quietly. "I really saw those trucks," he whispered. "One of the men was near your garage window." Caleb nodded slowly. "I believe you." Sheriff Holloway approached carrying 2 coffees. The older man looked exhausted. "You planning to tell me what's really going on up there?" he asked carefully. Caleb hesitated. Then he looked toward the windows where snow hammered the dark streets of Pine Hollow. "Did my father ever report anything involving Black Creek mining?" Ben Holloway's expression changed immediately. The sheriff sat heavily across from him. "Your old man came to me plenty of times." Claire looked between them nervously. "He believed Black Creek was poisoning streams throughout the valley," Ben continued quietly. "Said people were getting sick, veterans mostly, ranch families too." "What happened?" The sheriff stared into his coffee. "Nothing." Silence settled heavily around the booth. Ben rubbed tired eyes. "Black Creek owns half this county, Caleb. Jobs, land leases, campaign donations." He lowered his voice further. "Folks around here learned a long time ago not to ask certain questions." Caleb thought about the journals hidden beneath the welding station. About Lucas Hale's photograph. About Harold's tape recordings. Did you know Lucas Hale? Caleb asked suddenly. Sheriff Holloway looked surprised. The Marine? Caleb nodded. Ben exhaled slowly. He worked security for Black Creek years ago, after coming back from overseas. The sheriff paused. Good man, smart. Started digging into company records after a few local vets died strange. And then? The sheriff looked toward the storm outside. One winter they found his truck near Elk Pass. Claire crossed her arms tightly. What happened to him? Ben's jaw tightened. They never found a body. The diner suddenly felt colder. Ghost lifted his head from beside Eli's chair. Always listening. Caleb stared silently at the sheriff. But my father kept working with him, he said quietly. Ben frowned. What do you mean? Caleb immediately realized he had said too much. The sheriff noticed. Caleb, he said carefully, if Harold left you something, you need to be real careful. Lightning flashed beyond the diner windows. For one brief second, the entire room glowed white. Then darkness returned. Caleb stood. I should get back. Claire looked uneasy. Maybe you shouldn't stay alone up there tonight. I'll be fine. But even as he said it, he knew he didn't believe it. Ghost rose beside him instantly. Before leaving, Eli stepped closer and hugged the dog tightly around the neck. Thank you, the boy whispered. Ghost licked his cheek once. Simple, gentle, enough to make Claire quietly wipe tears from her eyes. Outside, freezing wind cut across the parking lot, hard enough to sting Caleb's face. The drive back to the garage felt different now. No longer lonely, dangerous. His headlights carved narrow tunnels through blowing snow while pine trees bent violently beneath the storm. Several times Caleb checked the mirrors, expecting black SUVs behind him. Nothing. Only darkness. But Ghost remained alert the entire drive. By the time Mercer Garage emerged through the storm, snow had already buried half the gravel lot. Caleb parked quickly and scanned the property. No lights. No movement. Still, his instincts screamed something was wrong. Ghost jumped from the truck first. Immediately, the dog barked sharply toward the rear of the building. Caleb drew the heavy flashlight from beneath the seat and moved fast through the snow. The rear service door stood slightly open. His pulse dropped instantly into combat calm. Someone had broken in. Ghost pushed through the doorway ahead of him, growling deep in his throat. The garage smelled different now. Cold air, wet boots, and smoke. Fresh smoke. Caleb swept the flashlight across the repair bay. The welding station had been moved. Again. But worse than that. The hidden compartment stood open. Papers littered the floor everywhere. Somebody had searched through Harold's records in a hurry. Damn it! Ghost paced aggressively through the garage before stopping near the old fuel storage tanks at the rear wall. The dog barked twice. Caleb followed the flashlight beam toward a rusted steel tank partially hidden beneath shelves of junk parts. Something black stained the concrete beneath it. Burn marks. He crouched slowly. Inside the tank sat a stack of half-burned documents. Someone had tried destroying them but abandoned the job halfway through. Caleb carefully pulled the scorched papers free. Ghost stayed close beside him. One surviving page immediately caught his eye. A list of names. County officials. Land surveyors. Bank representatives. And beside several names, Harold had written one word in red ink. Paid. Caleb's jaw tightened. Corruption. Not rumors. Not paranoia. Proof. Another page revealed maps of groundwater contamination stretching across Black Creek property zones. Entire sections of the valley had been marked with handwritten notes. Cancer clusters. Livestock deaths. Veteran housing sites. Caleb felt anger rising slowly through him now. Cold anger. Controlled anger. The kind forged during war. Ghost suddenly moved deeper into the garage again. The dog shoved his nose beneath a loose metal panel near the fuel tank. Caleb pried it open carefully. Inside sat another hidden envelope blackened by smoke. Lucas Hale's name was written across the front. Caleb opened it slowly. Photographs spilled into his hands. Nighttime images of tanker trucks unloading barrels beside mountain streams. Security guards carrying rifles. Black Creek vehicles parked near isolated veteran housing cabins. Then Caleb saw the final photograph. Wade Granger standing beside a county commissioner near a riverbank where warning signs had been removed. Someone had circled Wade's face heavily in black marker. Ghost whined softly beside him. Caleb flipped the photo over. Harold's handwriting covered the back. Lucas thinks somebody inside town government is helping them silence witnesses. Caleb's stomach tightened. Someone local. Someone trusted. Maybe somebody smiling at him every day in Pine Hollow. The realization chilled him more than the storm outside. A sudden noise froze both Caleb and Ghost instantly. Footsteps, outside the garage. Ghost moved silently toward the entrance. Caleb killed the flashlight. The footsteps crunched slowly through fresh snow, then stopped. For several long seconds, only wind rattled the building. Caleb barely breathed. Ghost's growl deepened. Then a flashlight beam swept briefly across the front windows before disappearing again. Whoever stood outside knew exactly where to look. Another slow crunch in the snow. Moving away now. Caleb rushed to the side window carefully. A figure climbed into a dark pickup parked beyond the pumps. No license plates visible beneath the snow. The engine roared to life, and before the truck disappeared into the storm, Caleb caught one brief glimpse of the driver through the windshield. A familiar face, someone from town. But the snow blurred the features before he could fully recognize them. Ghost barked furiously as the truck vanished into the darkness. Caleb stood motionless beside the window. Because now he understood something terrifying. This wasn't only about Black Creek anymore. Someone inside Pine Hollow had been protecting them for years, and whoever it was had just searched his father's garage for evidence they were desperate to destroy. Snow hammered the roof of Mercer Garage through most of the night. The storm deepened until the entire valley disappeared beneath swirling white darkness. Wind screamed through the bitterroot pines hard enough to shake the old windows, while Caleb sat alone inside the office staring at the burned documents spread across Harold's desk. Ghost refused to leave the front entrance. The German Shepherd paced constantly between the garage bays and the side windows, restless in a way Caleb had learned never to ignore. Military dogs trusted instincts over logic, and Ghost's instincts were screaming danger. Caleb leaned back slowly in the old chair and rubbed tired hands across his face. His father had uncovered something enormous. Years of illegal dumping, corrupt officials, veterans dying under suspicious circumstances, Lucas Hale disappearing after investigating Black Creek, and now somebody inside town was helping cover it all up. The realization left Caleb feeling strangely hollow, not shocked, just tired. Because after war, betrayal no longer surprised him. Outside, thunder rolled again through the mountains. Ghost suddenly stopped pacing. His ears rose sharply. Then came the sound. Crunch. Tires on snow. Caleb stood instantly. No headlights appeared through the windows. That was worse. Ghost moved silently toward the rear service bay with a low growl building in his throat. Caleb killed the office lamp immediately. Darkness swallowed the garage. Only moonlight reflecting off snow filtered faintly through the windows now. Another crunch outside. More than one vehicle. Caleb's heartbeat slowed automatically. Combat calm. He moved toward the welding station and quickly sealed Harold's remaining journals back inside the hidden compartment beneath the floor. Ghost stared toward the rear wall now, listening. Then Caleb heard voices outside, muffled, close. Someone circled the building. Another person tested the front door handle, locked, for now. Caleb reached beneath the workbench and grabbed the old 12-gauge shotgun Harold used to keep for coyotes. Dust covered the barrel, but the weapon remained clean inside. His father had maintained everything, even waiting for trouble. Ghost suddenly barked once, a warning. Then glass exploded somewhere near the rear office window. Caleb spun instantly. Dark figures moved through the blowing snow outside. 3 of them, maybe 4. Flashlights cut violently through the darkness. "Spread out!" somebody shouted. Ghost lunged toward the rear hallway with savage force. Caleb followed. The back service door burst inward under a hard kick just as he reached the corridor. 2 men rushed inside wearing heavy winter jackets and ski masks. The first one raised a flashlight. Ghost hit him before he could react. The German Shepherd slammed into the intruder's chest with terrifying force, driving him backward against tool shelves hard enough to collapse metal racks onto the floor. The second man shouted and swung something heavy toward the dog. Caleb fired the shotgun into the ceiling. The deafening blast shook the garage. Everyone froze. "Get out!" Caleb roared. For one brief second, the intruders hesitated. Then another crash echoed from the main repair bay. More men entering. Ghost released the first attacker instantly and raced toward the front of the garage. Caleb followed through darkness and chaos as snow blew through shattered windows. Flashlights danced wildly between repair lifts and hanging chains. One masked man already stood beside the welding station. Searching. They knew exactly where the compartment was. "Stop!" Caleb shouted. The intruder turned sharply. Then everything happened at once. Ghost launched across the garage. A loud crack exploded through the darkness. Gunfire. The sound hit Caleb like a physical blow. Ghost yelped violently and crashed into the attacker anyway, driving the man backward across the concrete floor. Caleb felt cold terror rip through him. "Ghost!" The garage erupted into chaos. Another intruder shoved over a shelf of tires while someone else sprinted toward the office. Caleb tackled one man near the hydraulic lift. Years of SEAL training taking over completely now. Fast, precise, controlled violence. The attacker slammed into the concrete hard enough to lose consciousness instantly. Ghost still fought near the welding station despite blood darkening the fur along his shoulder. The dog refused to retreat. Another masked man grabbed a stack of Harold's files and bolted toward the rear exit. Caleb lunged after him, but suddenly flames burst near the office wall. One of the intruders had knocked over an old fuel heater during the struggle. Fire spread fast across spilled oil and decades of dust. Smoke filled the garage almost immediately. "Move!" somebody yelled. The attackers fled into the storm. Caleb rushed toward Ghost instead. The German Shepherd staggered near the welding station, blood dripping onto the concrete beneath him. Rage surged through Caleb so hard it nearly blinded him. He dropped beside the dog instantly. "Stay with me," he whispered roughly. Ghost pressed weakly against him, still trying to stand despite the wound. The fire spread quickly along the rear office wall. Smoke thickened. Caleb grabbed Ghost beneath the chest and forced himself upright. The dog weighed nearly 90 pounds, but adrenaline erased the burden. Flames climbed toward the rafters while old tires and oil cans began exploding from heat. Caleb stumbled toward the side exit carrying Ghost through smoke and falling debris. Behind him, part of the office ceiling collapsed in sparks. They barely escaped before flames swallowed the rear corner of the garage. Snow hissed violently against the fire outside. Caleb lowered Ghost carefully beside the truck and immediately checked the wound. Gunshot through the shoulder. Blood everywhere, but not arterial. Thank God. Ghost whimpered softly while Caleb pressed shaking hands against the injury. "You're okay," he whispered desperately. "You hear me? Stay with me." Red and blue lights finally appeared through the storm below the mountain road. Sheriff Holloway's deputies. Too late. Always too late. The fire crews arrived minutes later, battling flames while snow buried the mountains deeper in white silence. Caleb sat in the snow beside Ghost the entire time. Blood soaked through his gloves. The dog's breathing remained shallow but steady. Sheriff Holloway approached slowly through blowing snow, face grim beneath flashing emergency lights. What happened? Caleb stared at the burning garage. They came for the evidence. Ben looked toward the shattered windows and broken doors. How many? 4, maybe 5. The sheriff cursed quietly. Then his eyes fell to Ghost's wound. Jesus. Caleb gently stroked the dog's neck. Ghost still watched the garage despite the pain, still guarding it, even wounded. Ben crouched beside Caleb heavily. There's something you need to know. Caleb looked at him. Snow collected across both men's jackets while the fire crackled behind them. The sheriff hesitated before speaking. Your father brought evidence against Black Creek years ago, he admitted quietly. Names, financial records, photos. What happened to it? Ben stared into the fire. County commissioners buried everything. Caleb's jaw tightened. Why? Because Black Creek kept this town alive after the mills shut down. Ben swallowed hard. Half the county depended on them. Ghost let out a weak growl as paramedics approached. The dog still didn't trust strangers. Caleb held him firmly. Ben lowered his voice further. Your father never stopped digging after that. Said people were dying because nobody had the courage to fight back. Caleb looked toward the burning garage. Flames reflected across the snow like war zones he thought he left behind years ago. Somebody in town tipped them off, he said quietly. Ben didn't answer immediately, because they both already knew it was true. The sheriff finally stood. You can't stay here tonight. Caleb barely heard him. His focus remained on Ghost. The German shepherd looked exhausted now, amber eyes struggling to stay open. But even injured, the dog rested protectively against Caleb's leg. Loyal to the end. Then suddenly, Ghost lifted his head weakly toward the garage, growling again. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. Near the rear wall of the burning building, hidden behind smoke and falling snow, stood a shadowy figure watching the fire, motionless, waiting. And before Caleb could react, the figure disappeared back into the storm-covered mountains. Snow swirled violently through the firelight as Caleb stared into the darkness where the stranger had stood only seconds earlier. Gone. Like a ghost swallowed by the bitter roots. Behind him, Mercer Garage burned against the storm-black sky while firefighters shouted over the wind. Water hissed against twisted metal and collapsing beams. The old building looked less like a garage now, and more like the wreckage of something ancient finally giving way under years of buried pressure. Ghost let out another weak growl beside Caleb's leg. Then the dog nearly collapsed. Caleb caught him instantly. Easy, he whispered. Blood still seeped through the thick fur around Ghost's shoulder. Despite the emergency bandages, paramedics had wrapped tightly around the wound. Sheriff Holloway stepped closer through the snow. You need to get him someplace warm. Caleb nodded once, but his eyes remained fixed on the burning garage. His father's garage. The last thing Harold Mercer ever left him. The storm continued building around the valley, while flames reflected across the snow-covered mountainsides. Caleb suddenly realized something painful. The garage had barely survived Harold's death. Now it might not survive his return either. Claire's truck headlights appeared through the storm moments later. She climbed out before the vehicle fully stopped, panic crossing her face when she saw Ghost lying against Caleb. Oh my God! Ghost lifted his head weakly when she approached. Claire dropped beside them instantly, brushing snow from the dog's fur. Is he going to make it? Caleb swallowed hard. He lost a lot of blood. Claire looked toward the burning garage and then back toward Caleb's face. You can't stay here tonight. Sheriff Holloway nodded in agreement. The roads are getting worse. Storm's shutting down half the county already. Caleb looked at Ghost. The dog's breathing had grown shallow from exhaustion. Then suddenly another memory surfaced. Harold's hunting cabin. High in the bitter roots near Lost Horse Ridge. Isolated. Hidden. Safe. My father had a cabin, Caleb said quietly. The sheriff frowned. Up near the old ranger trail? Caleb nodded. Ben looked uneasy. That road'll disappear under snow before morning. I know. Claire stared at him like he was insane. You're not driving into the mountains in this weather. Caleb gently adjusted Ghost's bandage. I don't have much choice. The sheriff studied him silently for several seconds. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed Caleb a small ring of old keys. Your father gave these to me 2 years before he died, Ben said quietly. Said if anything ever happened, you might come back someday. Caleb stared at the keys in stunned silence. Even after everything between them, Harold had still prepared for his return. Something tightened painfully inside his chest. Snow buried the mountains deeper as Caleb carefully lifted Ghost into the truck. The German shepherd whimpered softly, but stayed calm beneath Caleb's touch. Claire stepped beside the passenger door. I'm coming with you. Caleb shook his head immediately. No. You can barely keep your eyes open. I'll manage. Claire crossed her arms stubbornly. And if Ghost starts bleeding again halfway up the mountain? Caleb had no answer for that. 20 minutes later, they left Pine Hollow behind. The storm swallowed the road almost immediately. Snow blasted across the windshield, while the truck climbed narrow mountain switchbacks surrounded by towering black forests. Visibility dropped so low, Caleb could barely see beyond the hood. Ghost lay stretched across the back seat beneath blankets Claire pressed against his wound. The dog's amber eyes followed Caleb constantly through the mirror. Still alert. Still guarding him. Even hurt. Claire adjusted the flashlight while snow pounded against the windows. How far? Another 15 miles. She looked outside uneasily. This place really that isolated? Caleb nodded. My father built it himself after Korea. The mountains closed tighter around them as elevation increased. Pine trees bent beneath heavy snow, while icy cliffs disappeared into darkness beside the road. Everything felt buried beneath silence now, the kind of silence that forced old memories upward. Caleb tightened his grip on the wheel. Then the nightmares returned again. Not dreams this time. Memories. Afghanistan mountains. Snow-covered ridges near the border. Men freezing inside broken villages while helicopters circled overhead. Lucas Hale laughing beside a fire one night after patrol. You ever think about disappearing somewhere after all this? Lucas had asked back then. Caleb remembered shrugging. Nowhere stays quiet forever. The memory faded as the truck rounded another dangerous curve. Claire noticed his expression. You okay? Caleb nodded automatically. The lie came easier than truth, but Claire kept watching him. My husband used to look like that sometimes, she said quietly. Caleb glanced toward her briefly. Like what? Like he was somewhere else. Snow hissed across the windshield. Claire stared ahead into the storm. After his accident, people kept telling me grief gets smaller. She gave a faint, tired smile. Turns out it doesn't. You just learn how to carry it. Caleb said nothing. Because she was right. Ghost stirred weakly behind them. Caleb reached back without looking and rested one hand against the dog's fur, grounding himself. The mountain road narrowed dangerously near the ridge. Then finally, headlights illuminated a small cabin tucked deep among snow-covered pines. Harold Mercer's cabin looked ancient beneath the storm. Smoke stains darkened the stone chimney, while thick snow buried the porch railings almost completely. Wind pushed through the surrounding trees hard enough to make them groan, but the structure still stood. Solid. Stubborn. Like Harold himself. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar wood, fireplace ash, and old leather. Claire quickly helped Caleb lay Ghost near the stone fireplace while he struggled to light the old lanterns. Eventually, warm amber light filled the room. The cabin looked frozen in time. Old hunting rifles hung above the mantel. Fishing gear lined one wall. Military photographs covered shelves beside stacks of weathered books. And everywhere Caleb looked, he found traces of his father. A coffee mug, an old coat, boots beside the door, as if Harold might return from the woods any minute. Ghost whimpered softly. Claire immediately knelt beside him. "I need hot water." Caleb moved automatically, filling a rusted kettle from the cabin pump, while Claire unpacked medical supplies from a first aid kit she grabbed in town. Snow battered the windows harder outside. The storm had fully trapped them now. Claire carefully cleaned the wound, while Ghost endured it silently, except for occasional low growls when pain surged too sharply. "You brave old boy," she whispered gently. Ghost looked toward Caleb instead. Always toward Caleb. The fire crackled warmly as hours passed. Eventually, Ghost's breathing steadied enough for him to sleep beside the hearth. Only then did Caleb finally sit heavily in the old armchair near the fireplace. Exhaustion crashed into him all at once. Claire handed him a mug of coffee. "You should rest." Caleb stared into the flames. "I tried that once." She studied him quietly. The firelight softened the hard edges of his face now. Without the cold mountain darkness around him, Caleb looked less intimidating and more worn down by years of carrying things nobody else could see. "You blame yourself for something," Claire said softly. Not a question. Caleb remained silent a long time, then finally spoke. "Men died under my command." The fire popped sharply. "I came home," he continued quietly. "Some of them didn't." Claire watched him carefully. "That's not the same thing as failing them." Caleb laughed once under his breath. Humorless. "You sound like military therapists." "No," Claire replied softly. "I sound like somebody who knows guilt can eat a person alive if they let it." Silence returned between them. Outside, the blizzard roared through the mountains. Inside, firelight flickered across the cabin walls, while Ghost slept beside the hearth, occasionally twitching in dreams. Then Caleb noticed something near the bookshelf. A small wooden box. His father's handwriting marked the lid. For Caleb. His chest tightened instantly. Slowly, he carried the box back to the fire. Inside sat dozens of newspaper clippings, military articles, photos, everyone connected to Caleb's career. SEAL Team Rescue Operation saves hostages. Montana native receives Silver Star, K. 9 unit returns home after deployment. Harold had saved them all. Every article, every photograph. Claire watched silently while Caleb turned the clippings over with shaking hands. At the bottom of the box lay several cassette tapes. One was labeled differently from the others. "If you finally came home." Caleb stared at the words a long time before placing the tape into the old recorder beside the fireplace. Static crackled softly. Then Harold Mercer's voice filled the cabin once more. Older now, tired, but deeply human. "Caleb," the recording began quietly, "if you're hearing this, then I probably ran out of time before fixing things between us." Caleb lowered his eyes. The fire crackled gently nearby. "I was angry too long," Harold continued. "And proud too long. That's the curse men in this family carry." Claire quietly stepped away toward the kitchen area, giving him privacy. "I watched your career from a distance," Harold said. "Every article, every medal. Even when we stopped talking, I never stopped being proud of you." Caleb shut his eyes hard. Emotion rose suddenly inside him so fast, it nearly stole his breath. Ghost lifted his head weakly from beside the fire, listening too. Then Harold's voice softened even more. "And son, there's something you need to know about Ghost." Caleb froze. The tape hissed softly. "Ghost was never assigned to you by accident." The cabin fell completely silent, except for the storm raging outside, and Caleb slowly realized his father had been planning something far bigger than he ever imagined. The cassette hissed softly beside the fireplace. Ghost lifted his head from the blanket near the hearth, ears twitching weakly at the sound of Harold Mercer's voice. Firelight danced across the German shepherd's scarred face while snow battered the cabin windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Caleb sat frozen in the old armchair. His hands tightened slowly around the recorder. Harold continued speaking through static and time. "If you're hearing this," the old man said quietly, "then Ghost probably kept you alive long enough to get here." Caleb swallowed hard. Claire stood silently near the kitchen doorway, listening now, despite herself. Harold's voice carried exhaustion beneath it, and regret. "A few years after your brother died," he continued, "I started donating money to a military K-9 rehabilitation program outside Virginia." Caleb frowned slightly. His younger brother, Daniel, had died in a car accident when he was 19. Caleb had already been overseas then, halfway through BUD/S training with the Navy. He never made it home for the funeral. Another ghost. Another regret. "I started volunteering there after Korea veterans introduced me to some handlers," Harold said. "Most folks don't realize what happens to military dogs after war. Some come home damaged worse than the soldiers." Ghost shifted softly beside the fire. Caleb looked toward him. The old man's voice lowered further. "That's where I first heard about Ghost." Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains. The cabin lights flickered briefly before steadying again. Harold continued. "They said there was a shepherd nobody could place. Too aggressive. Too attached to combat work. They were talking about retiring him permanently to a kennel facility." Caleb stared at Ghost silently. The dog watched him through tired amber eyes. Then Harold spoke the words that changed everything. "But I saw something familiar in him." The fire crackled sharply. "You!" Caleb shut his eyes briefly. "I knew what war could do to a man," Harold said softly. "And I knew what loneliness could finish." Claire lowered her gaze. The storm outside seemed farther away now, like the cabin itself had become suspended somewhere between past and present. "I started following your deployments after we stopped talking," Harold admitted. "I read every report I could find. Saw your medals. Saw the casualties, too." Caleb's chest tightened painfully. "You carried too much death home with you, son." The tape crackled. "And I knew one day it would start swallowing you." Ghost slowly pushed himself upright despite the injury and limped toward Caleb's chair. The dog rested his heavy head against Caleb's knee exactly the way he always did after nightmares, like he understood every word. Harold's voice softened further. "When I heard you'd been assigned to Ghost after retirement, I didn't believe in coincidence anymore." Caleb's breathing slowed unevenly. The old man sighed deeply on the recording. "I made calls, pulled favors through the rehabilitation program, paid what I had to pay." Claire's eyes widened slightly. Harold had arranged it. All of it. "Ghost wasn't sent to you because he needed saving," Harold said quietly. "He was sent because you did." Silence filled the cabin again, except for the storm and crackling fire. Caleb lowered his head slowly. Years of memories rushed through him all at once. Ghost dragging him awake from PTSD nightmares, stopping panic attacks before they spiraled, blocking crowded strangers in airports, pressing against him during sleepless nights when depression hollowed everything out. The dog had never left him, not once, and somehow Harold had known Caleb would need that long before Caleb admitted it himself. Ghost licked Caleb's hand softly. Simple, loyal, certain, the kind of love that expected nothing back. Caleb finally spoke, voice rough. "You stubborn old man." The tape continued turning. "There's more," Harold said. Caleb straightened again immediately. "If Wade Granger's still looking for the files, then Lucas was right." Claire stepped closer now. "Right about what?" The tape hissed heavily for several seconds. Then Harold answered. Lucas believed Black Creek wasn't only dumping chemicals. Caleb felt cold settle through him again. He thought they were moving military-grade materials through the valley after dark using old mining tunnels. Claire frowned. What kind of materials? Harold's answer came slowly. Things tied to overseas contracts, missing equipment, weapons parts, stuff buried under federal paperwork nobody would ever check. Caleb stared into the fire. Smuggling. Not just corruption. Something larger. More dangerous. Then Harold said another name Caleb hadn't heard in years. Your old commanding officer tried warning Lucas before he disappeared. Caleb froze instantly. Commander Nathan Briggs, former SEAL team leader. Dead nearly 10 years now from what the Navy called a training accident. Except suddenly, Caleb wasn't sure anymore. The tape crackled violently. Lucas found proof somebody inside Black Creek was connected to military contractors overseas, Harold continued. That's when people started dying. Ghost growled softly now, low, uneasy. The old man's voice weakened further near the end of the recording. If they come after you, trust the dog before you trust anybody else. Caleb looked toward Ghost again. And son, the tape nearly faded into static. I'm sorry I waited too long to tell you I loved you. The recording clicked off. Only firelight remained. Claire quietly wiped tears from her face before turning away toward the kitchen. Caleb sat motionless for a long time. The cabin suddenly felt impossibly small beneath the weight of everything Harold had hidden. Ghost rested beside his chair again, exhausted, but calm now that Caleb seemed calmer too. Outside, the storm deepened into full blizzard conditions. Wind screamed across the mountain ridge hard enough to shake snow loose from the roof. Claire finally returned carrying fresh bandages. We need to check Ghost's shoulder again. Caleb nodded and helped carefully unwrap the blood-soaked dressing. The wound looked ugly, but cleaner now. Ghost endured the pain silently while Claire worked. You know, she said quietly while wrapping the bandage, most dogs would have run from gunfire. Ghost looked toward Caleb again. Not most dogs. Not Ghost. Caleb gently scratched behind the dog's ears. He stayed on target even after getting shot. Claire stared at the shepherd in disbelief. He saved your life. Caleb didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew that wasn't the first time. The fire burned lower as midnight approached. Snow buried the cabin nearly to the windows now, while mountain winds roared endlessly through the trees outside. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something unfamiliar beneath all the exhaustion and grief. Purpose. Not revenge. Not anger. Something steadier. His father died trying to expose the truth. Lucas Hale vanished trying to help him. And somebody in Pine Hollow was still protecting Black Creek from inside the town itself. Caleb leaned forward slowly and opened Harold's remaining journals beside the fire. Page after page revealed more connections, shipping routes, county payments, medical reports, land seizures targeting veteran-owned property. Then one folded document slipped free from between the pages. An old personnel photograph. A younger man in military uniform stood beside Ghost during training exercises overseas. Caleb's breath caught instantly. He recognized him. Staff Sergeant Aaron Pike, Ghost's original handler, officially killed during an ambush in Syria 8 years earlier. But Harold had written something across the back of the photo. Pike contacted Lucas before he disappeared. Claire looked over Caleb's shoulder. What does that mean? Caleb stared at the picture, slowly realizing the dead might not be as dead as everyone believed. Outside, lightning flashed across the mountains, and somewhere far below the cabin, buried beneath snow and darkness, engines moved slowly through Pine Hollow once again. The blizzard tightened its grip on the Bitterroots by dawn. Snow buried the cabin windows halfway, while violent wind screamed through the pine forest surrounding Lost Horse Ridge. Entire trees groaned under the weight of ice and snow, bending toward the frozen earth like exhausted soldiers. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Caleb sat awake beside it. Harold's journals spread across the wooden floor around him. He hadn't slept more than an hour all night. Too many names, too many lies, too many dead men. Ghost rested near the hearth beneath heavy blankets, breathing steadier now despite the bandaged shoulder. The German shepherd's amber eyes tracked Caleb constantly, refusing to fully relax even in pain. Claire slept lightly on the couch nearby with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The storm outside made the cabin feel cut off from the rest of the world. But Caleb knew better. Danger didn't stop for weather. A sudden burst of static crackled from the old weather radio near the kitchen. Then Sheriff Holloway's voice cut through the noise. Emergency advisory for all Bitterroot County residents. Roads into Pine Hollow are now closed due to whiteout conditions. The transmission crackled again. Then another voice interrupted briefly in the background. Urgent, panicked. Caleb immediately stood. Ghost lifted his head at once. The sheriff returned to the radio, but now his tone sounded different, tighter. If anybody hears this, Ben said carefully, there's been a break-in at the county records office overnight. Claire woke instantly. What? Caleb moved toward the radio. The sheriff continued. Several evidence storage rooms were destroyed by fire. Deputies are investigating possible connections to Black Creek mining. Caleb's jaw tightened. They were cleaning house, destroying records before investigators could reach the valley. Ghost suddenly struggled upright beside the fireplace, growling low toward the cabin windows. Caleb noticed it immediately. What is it? The German shepherd limped toward the front door despite the injury. Then headlights appeared faintly through the storm outside, coming fast up the mountain road. Claire stood abruptly. Oh God! Caleb killed the lanterns instantly. Darkness swallowed the cabin except for faint firelight. Outside, at least 3 vehicles climbed slowly through the snow toward the ridge, black SUVs. Ghost's growl deepened. They found us, Claire whispered. Caleb moved automatically now. Years of combat instinct snapped fully awake. He grabbed Harold's journals and stuffed them into a canvas duffel beside the remaining cassette tapes. Then he crossed quickly toward the back wall and yanked aside an old bookshelf. Behind it sat a narrow steel hatch built into the cabin floor. Claire stared in disbelief. What is that? My father's emergency tunnel. The old man had built hidden escape routes everywhere. Cold War habits, paranoia, or maybe experience. Ghost limped beside Caleb as he forced the hatch open. A narrow underground passage disappeared into darkness beneath the cabin. The SUVs stopped outside. Doors slammed. Voices carried faintly through the storm. They're here, Claire hissed. Caleb shoved the duffel into the tunnel. Get down there. Claire hesitated. What about you? Caleb reached for the shotgun beside the fireplace. I'll slow them down. Ghost barked sharply, as if rejecting the idea entirely. The dog planted himself beside Caleb, despite the shaking in his injured leg. No, Caleb whispered firmly. You stay with Claire. Ghost refused to move. Outside, boots crunched through heavy snow toward the cabin porch, then came pounding on the front door. Caleb Mercer! A voice shouted through the storm. Open the door! Wade Granger. Caleb recognized him instantly. The pounding continued. We only want the files. Ghost's ears flattened. The dog looked ready to tear through the door itself. Caleb glanced once toward Claire. Tunnel leads downhill to an old ranger shed, he whispered. Stay hidden until I come. Claire grabbed his arm suddenly. You can't fight all of them alone. Caleb's eyes hardened. I'm not trying to win. Another violent slam shook the cabin door. Then came the crash of breaking glass. They were coming in. Go! Caleb barked. Claire disappeared into the tunnel reluctantly, while Ghost remained frozen beside Caleb. The shepherd's loyalty hurt almost worse than the gunshot wound. Caleb crouched beside him briefly. You already saved me once. Ghost stared directly into his eyes. Then another window exploded inward. Snow blasted across the cabin floor. Dark figures rushed the porch outside. Caleb fired the shotgun through the shattered glass. The blast echoed across the mountains. One attacker dropped into the snow screaming while the others scattered for cover. Ghost erupted forward instantly. The German Shepherd smashed through the broken doorway before Caleb could stop him, launching directly into the blizzard toward the attackers. Ghost! Gunfire cracked through the storm. Flashlights danced wildly across snow-covered trees, while Ghost disappeared into whiteout darkness. Caleb rushed outside after him. Frozen wind hit like knives. The mountain ridge had become complete chaos. Snow, shouting, gunfire, engines idling through drifts. Ghost slammed one masked attacker into a snowbank 20 feet from the cabin, dragging the man down hard despite the injured shoulder. Another gunman raised a pistol toward the dog. Caleb fired first. The man stumbled backward into deep snow. Then headlights suddenly appeared farther down the ridge. More vehicles climbing the mountain. Sheriff Holloway's deputies. Red and blue lights flashed faintly through the blizzard below. Wade Granger cursed loudly somewhere near the SUVs. "Get the files!" But Caleb had already moved toward the tunnel entrance beneath the cabin floor. The attackers realized too late. One of them lunged toward Caleb through blowing snow. The two men crashed hard against the frozen ground beside the porch steps. Caleb drove his elbow sharply into the attacker's throat before disarming him with brutal efficiency. SEAL training. Fast. Violent. Final. The man collapsed unconscious into the drift. Ghost barked wildly deeper in the trees. Then Caleb heard another sound. An engine revving hard. One of the SUVs accelerated directly toward the cabin, toward the tunnel entrance beneath it. "They're trying to collapse it!" Caleb shouted. The vehicle smashed through the porch supports in an explosion of splintered wood and snow. Part of the cabin roof collapsed instantly. Flames erupted near the fuel barrels stacked beside the shed. The entire ridge lit orange against the storm. Caleb sprinted toward the tunnel entrance while smoke and sparks filled the air. Ghost burst from the tree line beside him at the same moment. Bleeding again. Still fighting. Still protecting him. The cabin groaned violently behind them as fire spread through dry timber walls. Caleb grabbed Ghost by the harness. "Move!" Together they disappeared into the underground passage moments before the cabin roof collapsed behind them in flames. The tunnel shook violently from the impact. Dust filled the narrow passage while Claire waited farther downhill near the ranger shed entrance. Ghost stumbled beside Caleb, nearly collapsing again. But the dog kept moving. Always moving. The tunnel finally opened into an abandoned ranger storage shed hidden among thick pines lower on the mountain. Sheriff Holloway's deputies reached the ridge above seconds later. Gunfire stopped. Sirens echoed faintly through the storm. Claire rushed toward Ghost immediately. The shepherd's bandage had turned dark with blood again. "Oh no." Caleb knelt beside the dog heavily. Ghost looked exhausted now, his breathing shallow. But when Caleb touched him, the dog's tail moved weakly once against the snow. Relief nearly broke Caleb apart right there. Then Sheriff Holloway's voice crackled over a deputy radio nearby. "County emergency system is still active," Ben shouted through static. "If you've got evidence, now's the time." Caleb looked toward the burning ridge above them, toward the valley buried beneath snow and corruption, then toward Harold's duffel bag filled with journals and tapes. The truth. All of it. He stood slowly. "There's a radio tower near Pine Hollow High School," he said. Claire stared at him. "In this storm?" Caleb looked down at Ghost. The German shepherd struggled painfully to stand beside him anyway. Ready. Always ready. "They tried burying this for 30 years, Caleb said quietly. "Tonight, it ends." Lightning exploded across the Bitterroot sky, and somewhere below the mountains, Pine Hollow waited in darkness for the truth that was finally coming. The storm followed them down from the ridge like something alive. Snow hammered the truck, while Caleb fought the steering wheel through whiteout roads barely visible beneath drifting ice. Sheriff Holloway's deputies moved ahead in separate vehicles, emergency lights flashing red and blue through the blizzard like distant warning beacons. Ghost lay stretched across the passenger seat, breathing shallow. Blood stained the blankets wrapped around his shoulders despite Claire's desperate attempts to keep pressure on the wound. Every few minutes, the dog lifted his head just enough to check Caleb, still guarding him, still making sure he stayed alive. "You're gonna make it," Caleb whispered quietly. Ghost's tail moved once against the seat, weak, but there. Claire sat pressed beside the dog, one hand buried gently in his fur, while snow and darkness swallowed the mountains outside. "He needs a vet," she said softly. "He'll get one." Caleb's voice sounded harder now, steadier. Something inside him had changed during the storm. The grief was still there. The anger, too. But underneath it sat something stronger. Purpose. Harold Mercer had spent decades trying to protect this valley alone. Tonight, Caleb finally understood why. Pine Hollow emerged slowly beneath the blizzard around dawn. The little mountain town looked ghostly under deep snowdrifts and flickering streetlights. Most buildings remained dark from power outages, while emergency generators hummed faintly through the storm. But people were awake, watching. Deputy vehicles raced toward the high school radio tower at the edge of town, while rumors spread faster than the weather itself. Black Creek trucks had been seen fleeing county roads overnight. County records burned, the Mercer cabin destroyed, and Wade Granger missing. The emergency radio tower stood above Pine Hollow like a lonely steel skeleton against the storm-dark sky. Sheriff Holloway met them near the entrance, face pale from exhaustion. "We intercepted company radio traffic," Ben said quickly. "Federal investigators are already heading this way from Missoula." Claire looked stunned. "So it's finally over?" The sheriff glanced toward Caleb. "Only if people hear the evidence before Black Creek buries it again." Caleb looked down at the duffel bag filled with Harold's journals and cassette tapes. 30 years of truth. Ghost stirred weakly beside the truck door. Caleb crouched beside him immediately. The German shepherd tried painfully to stand again, despite the injury. "No," Caleb whispered. "You stay." But Ghost refused. The dog limped forward anyway, pressing against Caleb's leg exactly the way he always had after missions overseas, side by side, always. The storm screamed across the tower platform while Caleb climbed the narrow metal stairs, carrying Harold's recordings beneath one arm. Snow coated the steel rungs with ice while freezing wind tore through his jacket. Below him, Pine Hollow waited in silence, a town buried beneath snow and secrets. Inside the radio station, old equipment buzzed weakly beneath generator power. Sheriff Holloway handed Caleb a microphone. "You sure about this?" Caleb stared through the frozen windows overlooking the valley. "No." Then he pressed play. Static crackled across every emergency radio frequency in Bitterroot County. Truck radios, police scanners, kitchen radios, gas station speakers, everywhere. Then Harold Mercer's voice filled the storm. "If anybody's hearing this," the old man said quietly, "then people need to know what Black Creek mining buried in this valley." Caleb stood motionless while the recordings rolled one after another. Harold describing poisoned groundwater. Lucas Hale documenting missing veterans. County officials accepting money. Names, dates, evidence, truth. The entire valley listened together while snow-battered rooftops and pine forests outside. And for the first time in decades, nobody could silence it. Claire stood below the tower holding Ghost close beneath blankets, while townspeople slowly began gathering through the storm. Farmers, mechanics, widows, veterans, people Harold Mercer once helped quietly, without asking for anything back. Many listened with tears in their eyes. Others looked furious. But all of them finally understood. Sheriff Holloway stepped away from his radio suddenly. "Federal convoy just entered the county," he announced. Relief swept through the crowd below. Then gunshots exploded near the road. Everybody froze. A black SUV tore through the snow toward the tower entrance. Wade Granger. The vehicle slammed sideways into a deputy cruiser before stopping hard beneath the tower platform. Wade stumbled out, holding a pistol. desperate now, cornered. "This ends today!" he shouted upward toward Caleb. Sheriff Holloway reached for his weapon immediately, but Ghost moved first. Despite the wound, despite the blood loss, the German Shepherd exploded from beneath the blankets and charged directly through the snow toward Wade. "Ghost!" Claire screamed. Wade raised the pistol toward Caleb above the tower stairs. Then Ghost hit him. The impact knocked Wade backward into the drift, while the pistol fired harmlessly into the storm-dark sky. Deputies rushed forward instantly. The struggle lasted only seconds before Wade disappeared beneath officers and snow, but Ghost collapsed hard beside him, not moving. Caleb reached the ground almost before the deputies finished cuffing Wade. He dropped beside the dog immediately. "Ghost." No response. Fear ripped through him harder than any firefight ever had. Caleb pressed trembling hands into the shepherd's fur. "Come on, buddy." Snow swirled around them while the entire town watched silently. Then Ghost finally opened one eye, weakly, slowly, but alive. A broken laugh escaped Caleb before he could stop it. Relief nearly knocked the strength from his legs. Ghost's tail thumped faintly against the snow. The town erupted into applause around them. Not for Caleb, for the dog, for the wounded shepherd who refused to stop protecting people even after taking a bullet. Sheriff Holloway stepped beside Caleb quietly. "It's over." Caleb looked toward the mountains. Federal vehicles climbed into Pine Hollow, through the storm below, while deputies escorted Wade Granger away in handcuffs. For the first time since returning to Montana, Caleb finally believed it. Spring arrived slowly in the Bitterroots months later. Snow melted from the ridges while rivers swelled with fresh mountain runoff. Pine Hollow breathed easier now beneath warm sunlight and green hillsides. Federal prosecutions spread across the county. Black Creek executives vanished into courtrooms and investigations. Corrupt officials lost offices, land, and reputations. Families poisoned by contaminated water finally received compensation. And Harold Mercer's journals became evidence powerful enough to rebuild lives. The old garage reopened in late May. Fresh paint covered the walls now, while sunlight gleamed across restored windows and repaired lifts. A new wooden sign hung proudly above the entrance: Mercer and Ghost Garage. Veterans worked inside beside recovering addicts and local teenagers needing second chances. Caleb taught engine repair in the mornings, while volunteer counselors used the old office as a support center for struggling former service members. People came from all over western Montana, not just for repairs, for hope. Ghost became the heart of the place. The shepherd still limped slightly from the gunshot wound, and the gray around his muzzle had grown heavier. But children followed him everywhere through the garage bays, while veterans scratched his ears like greeting an old brother in arms, especially Eli. The boy smiled more now, talked more too. Sometimes Caleb caught Eli sitting quietly beside Ghost reading comic books aloud, while the dog rested in warm sunlight near the garage doors. Healing recognized healing. One evening near sunset, Caleb stood outside the garage alone while golden light spilled across the Bitterroot Mountains. The air smelled like pine trees, motor oil, and summer dust. Home. Ghost limped slowly beside him and sat near the old fuel pumps watching fireflies flicker through the valley below. Caleb looked up at the glowing garage sign, then toward the mountains where Harold once hunted, worked, and fought quietly for people nobody else protected. For years, Caleb believed his father only left him a broken garage. But now he understood the truth. Harold Mercer had left him a mission, a community, a reason to keep living. Ghost rested his head gently against Caleb's leg, and as the last sunlight faded across Pine Hollow, Caleb finally smiled without pain for the first time in many years. Because some men inherit money, Caleb Mercer inherited a second chance at life. If you believe loyalty and truth still matter in this world, drop a yes down in the comments. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, we'd love to hear where you're watching from tonight. Subscribe and stay with us for more stories about justice, resilience, and ordinary Americans standing their ground when everything's on the line.